So money is an interesting subject. A lot of people have very strong opinions about it, which can often lead to some very big disagreements.
For example, some people think money can buy happiness while others think that it can't.
Some people say you shouldn't go into debt because it enslaves you to the banks, while other people argue that you should go into debt and stay there because inflation will devalue that debt over time.
And some people say you should invest in individual stocks, while others say you should stay away from individual stocks and just invest in index funds.
Some people argue inflation is transitory, while other people argue that it's here to stay. You get the idea.
Yeah.
But most of the time, at least from what Brit and I have seen, these disagreements appear to be purely academic in nature, where you have two people having a brief back and forth on like a TV or radio show or some sort of podcast or something like that. And once they're done, they go back home and that's that. But what happens when two people get married, have a huge disagreement about how to spend their money, and they can't go back to their daily lives because they live together now, and the way one person spends their money directly and constantly impacts the other one? Well, you call it one of the leading causes of divorce. What's up, guys? My name is Mike.
And I'm Brit.
And today we're going to be talking about the subject of money and relationships.
So getting your finances in order when you're single can be difficult enough, but when you introduce a significant other into your life who may have different opinions about money, different spending habits, different financial goals, it can take things to a whole new level of difficulty very quickly.
Brit and I experienced this big time when we first got married. I mean, there were like entire weeks that went by sometimes when the only time we had conversations with one another was when we were arguing back and forth about stuff like, well, you bought this behind my back, or we didn't pay this off fast enough, or you should have budgeted for this when the month began. We both signed off on the budget, but why are you spending this now?
Didn't sound exactly like that to you.
We thought we were on the same page when we got married. I mean, we did premarital counseling. We went to a Dave Ramsey seminar. We had some discussions about our long-term financial goals, but we weren't on the same page. And there were several things we wish we had been told, or I guess we wish we had paid more attention to before we got married, about managing money together as a husband and wife, that we had to figure out the hard way through trial and error and a lot of arguing.
So, in our opinion, the reasons the topics of money and personal spending can stir up so much debate are: number one, spending is a reflection of what you value.
Yeah, so what you spend your money on, you value, or else you wouldn't spend your money on it. And over time, you develop spending habits based upon spending money on what you value. Since there are so many people with so many different backgrounds and values and beliefs in our society, of course there's going to be disagreements about how to best spend our money.
And number two is money is extremely important. So regardless of whether or not money can buy happiness, it can buy peace of mind and financial security. It pays for things that keep you alive, like food, water, shelter, and clothing.
On top of that, it also gives you freedom and autonomy. The more money you have, that means the more choices you have, the more things you can say no to, the more things you can do on your own terms. If you don't have enough money to pay for the things that keep you alive, well, now you're in a life and death situation, and of course you're going to be like on edge and easily angered or stressed out. If you have enough money to keep yourself alive, on the other hand, that kind of stress goes away. But if that's all the money you have, you don't have enough money to give yourself a little extra freedom or flexibility or wiggle room, that leads to another type of stress where you kind of feel like you're trapped or claustrophobic or something, like you can't move. So when Brit and I got married, even though we had very, very similar long-term financial goals, we had also developed very different financial habits and spending behaviors prior to that. And that led to a lot of arguing about how to best spend our income.
A lot of arguing. And apparently we're not the only ones. According to the CDC, the divorce rate in America is 44%, and financial problems, inability to get on the same page financially, and arguments that spring up related to money all constantly rank in the top reasons for divorce.
Which means if you and your significant other can get on the same page financially, you are statistically more likely to stay together. And Brit and I can tell you from experience that once this happens, it is awesome. So for the rest of this video, what Brit and I are going to do is talk about some of the things that we've learned about money and relationships over the past 8 years of being married, the biggest problems we've encountered regarding handling money, and also what we did to solve them and get on the same page financially.
And it's important to mention we're not psychologists or counselors. This is just purely our opinion from our experience. So take that for what it's worth.
So with that being said, what Brit and I would like to talk about first is just some of the more profound things that we have learned about money and relationships over the past 8 years of being married. The first one being, in our opinion, that marriage is a process that takes two people and turns them into one, even though like the two people still exist separately. When Brit and I got married, like the concept of my money ceased existing. Like it's no longer Mike's money or Brit's money, it's our money. and we need to be managing our money together.
This took us a little while to grasp at the beginning of our marriage, and it went well beyond just budgeting together.
And we'll go over this more in a few minutes, but like a lot of that initial friction that Brittany and I first experienced was basically because we were trying to handle money as though we were still single,
right,
and not married.
So another thing we learned was the arguments we were having over money were symptoms of a much larger issue, such as not understanding how to love one another or not understanding how to respect one another.
Yeah, and it's not that we didn't love and respect each other. It's
Right.
just that like you can understand something academically, but then there's like this gap between your academic understanding of something and an experiential understanding of something that usually comes with wisdom and other stuff. So there's this ancient scripture that goes something like this. It says, "Husbands, love your wives, and wives, respect your husbands." And I found this interesting because the husbands aren't asked to respect their wives, and the wives aren't asked to love their husbands. And from what Brittany and I have found, at least in our own lives,
Yeah.
it seems this is the case because, at least for me being a husband, it's very easy for me to respect Brittany.
Yeah, and it's also very easy for me to love Mike.
But it's not so easy for me to love Brittany in the same way that she loves me.
Yeah, and it's harder for me to respect in the way that Mike respects me. So, yeah.
So I think the scripture is trying to remind us to do the things that don't necessarily come as natural to us as it may to the other person. And the third thing that we kind of noticed was that the duration of a disagreement or an argument that Brittany and I would have about money depended upon how well we handled conflict, which is very important. How well you handle conflict is very important. Also, I would say just as important is how the conflict arises in the first place. And initially when we got married, we were terrible at handling conflict, just absolutely terrible about it. And that goes back to like the love and respect and that sort of thing, and not communicating well.
So in terms of how conflicts arose, especially in the beginning of our marriage regarding money, is I was just so used to being on my own. If I was driving home, getting hungry, I'd just buy some food. Or if I was out shopping, I'd just shop and buy. Instead of trying to communicate that with Mike at the beginning of the month, or letting him know, hey, these are some habits of mine or some things that I like to do. Let's try to find ways to work that into the budget instead of just not communicating it and then just doing it.
And that's something else that we didn't mention or we have a big note sheet in front of us because there's a lot that we want to talk about. And this is something that we didn't mention on there. From what Brittany and I have noticed, again, it's just based on our experience, like people are, in terms of money management, like they're either very nerdy and they like to pay attention to the details and kind of like look over everything and get, really efficient with how things are managed, or they don't care and they're more free-spirited. So if you're familiar with Dave Ramsey, he often describes different financial personalities as either the nerd or the free spirit. And in Brittany's and my case, I'm the nerd and Brittany's the free spirit, where Brittany's just kind of like, I'm just going to go spend this and this and this. And I'm like, okay, we're budgeting this much for this item on this month. We're budgeting this much for the next item. Okay, what's our tally so far? Okay, great. This is another reason we had so many arguments at the beginning, is because we have very different financial personalities, I guess you could say. So it took us a while to get used to them. All right, so we've gone over some of the more profound things that Brittany and I have learned. Now let's get more into the specifics about the biggest problems that Brittany and I experienced with money when we first got married, and still do occasionally. The biggest problem we encountered was our pride and selfishness getting in the way of acting together with our money.
Yeah.
This kept us, as we said before, acting as though we were single instead of acting as one married unit.
And this was the biggest reason it took us so long to get on the same page with money.
So in terms of my life, this pride and selfishness manifested themselves the biggest way in me being extremely hesitant to combine bank accounts in our finances, even before we got married. Like I knew we were getting married soon. I'm like, this idea of combining our money is like really makes me nervous. And that's because I like being in control. Like I'm the nerd. I like being in control. I'm like saying, all right, this amount of money goes here, this here, this here. And I knew that there was a risk when Brittany and I got married that because I was not going to be able to control everything and do things my way, our money was not going to be able to be used as efficiently as possible. If you're listening to my words when I'm saying this, you may be able to pick up on like the my, me. And it's kind of an example of where my brain was at that time. And it goes back to like thinking like I'm single. and not like I'm married.
And my biggest struggle was just sticking to the budget and not spending money. So that was trying to break that habit and then change to actually pull in my spending and not do big things or go out and do things without consulting Mike and using him as a resource and actually keeping me on the budget. So I was more that free spirit, and I was just living, like Mike was saying, in the way I've always lived instead of as a married couple.
Okay, so those are the problems that we noticed, or it took us a while to notice at least. What did we do to solve that? What was the solution? At least for me, all I had to do was basically just remember my vows to Brittany, what I promised her on the day of our wedding. I promised my loyalty, my faithfulness, all of my worldly possessions, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, till death do us part. Thinking back on that is kind of like a catch-all. What escapes that? There's nothing that escapes all that. What I was basically promising Brittany was my life, in sickness and in health, for better or worse, richer or poorer, till death do us part. That's my life. Not only that, but I made that promise in front of God, friends, and family. And I had to ask myself, what kind of a person do I want to be? Do I want to be somebody that Brittany can rely on, that she can trust? Or do I want to be somebody who's kind of flimsy with their word? And at that point, it was a pretty easy decision.
And it was the same realization for me. It's just, like you say, sticking to your word, and my life's yours. So the next biggest problem we had when it came to money was, while we were on the same page with our long-term financial goals, we were not on the same page when it came to how to reach those goals.
And this is something that we realized about money and relationships now looking back on everything. You kind of need to be on the same page with your long-term goals, but it helps tremendously if you're on the same page with a plan on how to reach them. Let's say your goal is like right here. Let's say your goal is right here. And then like I'm going this way and Brittany's going this way because we have two different plans on how to get there. We're not communicating. We're not agreeing on anything. We're never going to reach our goal if we're going in two different directions, right? Yeah. So that's why it's super important to be on the same page with your plan on how to get to your goals. And so, like, at least for me, I didn't really feel like we were on the same page financially until we got on the same page with how to reach our biggest financial goals.
So for us, when we first got married, our biggest goal was becoming debt-free, and we knew we needed to do a budget and stick to that in order to reach that goal.
So the budget was our plan.
Yep.
The only problem was we had very different ideas of what the budget
would look like.
Yeah. So a lot of the time what happened was, even though we made a budget together and kind of like signed off on it, there would be discrepancies in our spending or kind of like offshoots from the budget.
So for example, like what I was talking about earlier, I was coming home from work hungry and I'd stop and get some food, and that wasn't on the budget at all. Or I'd go over in my spending from fun money thinking I could pull from another category and then it'd just be okay. And that it's not okay, but that's what I would do.
On my end, I wanted to control the budget way too much. I wanted to cut all the fun spending out. I mean, I wanted to be on scorched earth, no spending whatsoever on things that we did not need to spend money on. So in my mind, we didn't need to go out to eat. So I was like, all right, well, no money for going out to eat ever until we're debt free. And it just didn't work.
Yeah.
Because again, like it goes back to like me being the nerd and Brittany being the free spirit.
And just balancing that, because now we're two people that are coming together in a relationship and figuring it out.
So the solution was, at least for me, I just had to give up control. I wanted to control things so much because I was so used to doing that. Again, going back to what we said a while ago, it just was not going to work because I wasn't single anymore. It wasn't just me that I had to be responsible for and like had to think of. It's both of us. And there's no way, I'm like, I can control myself, but I can't control Brittany. And so I had to give up this desire to make things as efficient as possible with our money. And I had to be okay with that, which means I basically had to love Brittany. I had to love her and recognize that she has this financial personality that's just very different than mine. I had to put that ahead of my desire to be 100% efficient. And it was difficult at first, but then it was awesome.
And I had to do the same, where I had to learn how to respect Mike and learn how to work with him and get to our goal.
I feel so bad for her having to, man, I couldn't imagine.
In that regard. But yeah, it was worth it.
So in conclusion, guys, marriage can be extremely difficult financially, but it could also be even more rewarding once you learn how to work together and get on the same page, and you learn kind of like, you know, each other's
quirks.
Yeah, quirks, thank you.
And something I've learned through all these years is our biggest successes we've had, and me personally in my life, has been because we've worked together as a married couple. And some of the biggest failures is when we try to work apart or outside of that.
So that being said, guys, we hope this video was helpful. I know it was kind of long. It's difficult thinking about what to say and how to say it when we're talking about something so deep and like
Yeah.
that can be so different for everybody. We did our best trying to relate as much of everything that we could to ourselves, rather than just saying like, well, this is true for everyone, or like, you know, things like that. We hope maybe some of you watching, you know, could relate to some of this, or maybe this helped out in some regard. If it was helpful or entertaining or whatever, if you enjoyed Brit and I talking about all of our mistakes, hit that thumbs up button. It helps out tremendously with the YouTube algorithm.
Also subscribe for more, and you can follow us on Instagram at It's Mike and Brit.
Yeah, we post there every now and then. Thanks again, guys, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.